In California, detectives were investigating a gruesome murder when the suspect fled and was eventually captured in Arizona. His confinement did not last long. He escaped and disappeared into the Grand Canyon, robbing and kidnapping tourists as he went. To stop the elusive killer, FBI agents and local officers joined forces on a dangerous manhunt. A killer was on the loose in one of America's most popular tourist destinations. Armed and desperate, he evaded law enforcement at every turn. As the busy holiday weekend approached, thousands of people became potential targets. I'm Derek Harlan, former head of the FBI's New York office. Agents would use any means necessary to track a killer before he could strike again. One morning, a fisherman cast his line into the Burns Cut River near Stockton, California. He felt a tug and reeled in something heavy. It was a large plastic bag. Inside, he found a human leg. The fisherman called the San Joaquin County Sheriff's Office. Deputies responded to the scene immediately. They confirmed the report of human remains and could find no clue as to the victim's identity. The deputies called in Homicide Detective Sergeant Rafael Mendoza, who would lead the investigation. The search of the river for any other items of evidence and body parts continued through the night and into the next morning. A boat unit was sent out to the river while detectives searched the banks. By first light, the deputies were dragging the river. While they checked the deeper water, detectives walked the riverbank. It was not long before they discovered another plastic bag. Inside were two arms. The wrists were bound together with masking tape. Nearby, the boat unit deputy soon pulled up another object. It was a human torso wrapped in a sheet. Later, they would find a right leg, the victim's head, and some clothing, all in separate plastic bags. After several hours of searching, investigators had recovered an entire male body. They did not know who the man was. It was a pretty brutal murder case. For someone to take the time to dismember a person, transport that person in different bags, and dispose of the body without caring, it was very callous and cold. At the morgue, a coroner examined the remains. He determined that the victim had been dismembered with a serrated knife. It would take more time to determine the actual cause of death or if the man was alive when he was dismembered. Detectives searched the clothing and found a wallet containing a California driver's license. It belonged to 40-year-old Samuel Lee McCrae of Stockton. Police records showed McCrae had a minor arrest record. A fingerprint check confirmed his identity. After informing McCrae's family of his death, detectives received permission to check his house for evidence. Once the victim was identified, and they had a name and a location where he lived, they responded to the victim's address in the 5200 block of East Mariposa Road in South Stockton. They arranged to meet Samuel McCrae's girlfriend at his home. She had reported McCrae missing earlier that day after not hearing from him on the phone for several days. His car was not there. She checked McCrae's house and saw that the place was in disarray. Many items were missing, including his white Jeep Cherokee. Also missing were two shotguns, a revolver, and a 9mm semi-automatic pistol. Detectives and deputies examined McCrae's house. Noting footprints on the floor, they conducted an electrostatic search that revealed details of prints made by boots. Investigators also recovered latent fingerprints, but none were foreign to the house. If the murder occurred in the house, the killer had removed any obvious evidence. In a homicide of this nature, you would expect to find blood all over the place. The person involved in this case had taken a great deal of time to clean and hide his tracks. In the bathroom, a deputy made an important discovery. They were just about ready to leave when a flashlight was run through the tub area and a reflection came from the drain. It looked like the sparkle from a sequin. The investigators knew it was collagen, a substance in bones that has a particularly reflective quality. Looking deeper into the drain, they found blood, tissue, bone, and a large amount of hair. Based on that evidence, there was a strong probability that the victim had been dismembered in the bathtub of the residence. Laboratory tests later matched the blood and hair to Samuel McCrae. Eventually, the coroner determined that McCrae had been dead before he was dismembered. The cause of death was a gunshot wound to the forehead. Powder burns indicated he had been shot at point-blank range. The coroner removed the bullet fragments and sent them to the state ballistics lab. Examiners there studied the size, weight, and composition of the fragments and determined that the murder weapon was a .22 caliber rifle. California Department of Justice examiners believe the weapon used was probably a Western Field brand rifle. Detectives found documents listing the serial numbers of McCrae's Jeep and his guns. They entered the numbers into the National Crime Information Center, a nationwide database used by law enforcement agencies to track criminals, missing persons, and stolen property. If the items turned up anywhere, detectives would be notified. Within days, a Stockton police officer discovered the victim's Jeep abandoned several miles from McCrae's house. An examination yielded no additional clues. Investigators still had no leads on the killer. They canvassed McCrae's neighborhood hoping to find a witness. No one reported seeing or hearing anything unusual, but one neighbor recalled that McCrae had been robbed 2 years earlier. Police records confirmed the story. A name search uncovered a report listing the suspect as Stephen Harding. In that case, Stephen had apparently robbed the victim at gunpoint. It was the first solid lead. Stephen was not at his last known address. So detectives tracked down his older brother, a campus police officer at a nearby college. The brother told detectives that Stephen was one of 5 brothers and was especially close to Derek Ray Harding. Stephen and Derek spent a great deal of time together. They often hunted and fished along the Burns Cut River, the same river where McCrae's body had been dumped. He told the detectives about one particular hunting trip Stephen and Derek had taken. They had shot a deer, brought it home, and butchered it in the bathtub of the residence. That detail was significant because the victim had been dismembered in the same way. After butchering the deer, Derek had placed the animal's limbs in black plastic garbage bags. Detectives recognized the eerie resemblance to the homicide of Samuel McCrae. They asked the brother to identify some clothing found in a bag containing body parts recovered from the Burns Cut River. He said the black shorts and t-shirt looked like those his brother Derek often wore. Police noted that no one in the Harding family had seen Stephen or Derek since the day Samuel McCrae was probably killed. The investigation had progressed to the point where there was enough probable cause to present the case to a judge. A search warrant was issued for Stephen and Derek, along with an arrest warrant. Officers returned to the brothers' trailer located behind their parents' house. No one was inside, so detectives searched the surrounding area. Behind the trailer, they found important evidence: a cut stock and a sawed-off barrel from a rifle. Laboratory examiners had reported that the weapon used to kill McCrae was probably a Western Field brand .22 caliber rifle. The barrel found in the field next to the suspect's house matched that description. The next day, deputies returned to the trailer. Stephen Harding was there. He was arrested and charged with murder. The second suspect, Stephen's brother Derek Ray Harding, was nowhere to be found. At the San Joaquin County Jail, detectives held one suspect in the murder and dismemberment of Samuel McCrae. Stephen Harding had been arrested after a month-long investigation, but detectives needed more evidence to hold him. His brother, Derek Ray Harding, was also wanted but had fled the area. Stephen swore he had nothing to do with the murder and said he did not know where Derek was. Since Stephen would not help locate Derek, the investigators turned to the Harding's father for answers. Mr. Harding offered valuable information regarding the possible murder weapon to Sergeant Rafael Mendoza. After speaking with Derek's father, Mendoza learned that Derek had been seen with a sawed-off .22 rifle. Their father said Derek and Stephen had been behind the trailer when Derek shot a dog with the .22. Then Stephen fired at it with a crossbow. Mr. Harding believed his sons had buried the dog in the field behind the trailer. Investigators searched the Harding property. They noticed one area that seemed to be covered with freshly dug earth and began to excavate. The dog was found, and another detective discovered a bullet in its brain. The bullet was processed at the state ballistics lab. Examiners determined that the dog had been killed with a Western Field .22 caliber rifle, the same model used to murder Samuel McCrae. The technician compared the bullet from the dog to the one that had killed McCrae. The tests indicated it was likely both bullets had been fired from the same weapon. Detectives returned to the county jail and confronted Stephen Harding. They described the damaging ballistics evidence, explaining that the bullet from the dog was consistent with the bullet that killed Samuel McCrae and that his brother Derek had been seen with a Westernfield .22. Realizing the case against them was strong, Stephen decided to cooperate. He claimed Derek had been involved in the first robbery of McRae 2 years earlier. Derek had vowed to kill McRae for pressing charges, but then went to prison for child molestation. When he was released a few months before McRae's death, Derek had mentioned going back to rob McRae again. Since no physical evidence implicated Stephen in Samuel McRae's death, investigators dropped the murder charge against him. They still needed to find his brother, but Derek Ray Harding had disappeared. For 6 months, Sergeant Rafael Mendoza worked the case but found no new leads. Then he was contacted by authorities in Winslow, Arizona, about Harding. I received a phone call from the Winslow Police Department. They informed me that he had been arrested in a bank robbery. That day, Harding had walked into the Valley National Bank in Winslow, more than 800 miles east of Stockton, California. He trained his 9mm pistol on the bank manager while a teller filled a bag with $25,000. When the teller was in another room, she tripped a silent alarm. A block away at the Winslow Police Department, Detective Elias Harper took the call. Under the concealment of an unmarked car, he had plenty of cover. He positioned himself where he could see what was happening inside the bank. Unable to get a clear view from the vehicle, he moved in for a closer look. When the detective checked through the window, he saw a single gunman backing toward the door with a hostage. The moment the man came through the door, Harper stuck his gun against the suspect's rib cage, pulled him toward the wall, and took the bank bag from his hand. The suspect was carrying a 9mm pistol. Detective Harper determined the man's name was Derek Ray Harding. An NCIC check revealed the outstanding murder warrant from California. Harper described the recovered weapon to Sergeant Mendoza. They informed me that they had in their possession a 9mm semi-automatic pistol. They gave me the serial number, and I confirmed it as the weapon taken from victim McRae's residence. Harding was convicted of armed robbery, kidnapping, and assault. At trial, he dared the judge to give him the stiffest sentence possible, vowing to escape within a year. The judge accepted the challenge and sentenced him to 4 life terms. California authorities decided not to extradite him immediately. He would serve his time at the Arizona State Prison in Florence. One day during the afternoon head count, prison officers discovered that prisoner number 85897 was not in his cell. The prison was locked down and thoroughly searched, but Derek Ray Harding was nowhere to be found. The convicted felon and suspected killer was on the run outside the Arizona State Prison in Florence. A massive manhunt began for escaped convict Derek Ray Harding, who had been serving 4 life sentences. Harding was also a suspect in a gruesome dismemberment in California. Arizona Department of Corrections fugitive investigator Douglas Shepard helped organize the search. We have a lot of expert trackers, dogs, vehicles, and equipment. The plan was to track him and apprehend him. We were going to cite him, pick up a trail, follow him with dogs, horses, and men, and locate him. Law enforcement teams from local, state, and federal agencies responded outside the prison, but Harding had already disappeared from the immediate area. While the teams widened their circle, Shepard returned to the prison to determine how the accused killer had managed to escape. Prison officials contacted the FBI for assistance. Authorities first checked Harding's records. The convicted felon had been housed in the central unit, the prison's most secure area. There was no evidence that he had tunneled out or otherwise breached the walls. He had been considered a model prisoner. They interviewed corrections officers and inmates to determine Harding's last actions inside. Douglas Shepard first established why Harding was not in his locked cell. At any given time, not all inmates are locked in their cells. Some are at work sites, some are working in the kitchen, and others are assigned elsewhere. A portion of the inmates are accounted for on an out-count sheet. Staff would visually confirm that certain inmates were working in the kitchen, for example, so those men would not be counted in their cells. Investigators learned that Harding had been assigned a janitorial job that included cleaning the infirmary. This gave him access to medical uniforms. He obtained a white lab coat from the medical unit inside the prison and a pair of white pants from workers in the kitchen. Investigators believed Harding exchanged his prison uniform for the lab coat, white pants, and a forged employee identification card. He simply walked out of the prison and a few miles into the town of Florence. Investigators reviewed Harding's record to determine where he might go. One possible destination was California, where he had family and connections. The other was Winslow, Arizona, where he had vowed to get even with the officers and FBI agents who had sent him to prison. Special Agent Grant Whitaker of the FBI's Phoenix field office joined the investigation. He would work closely with the Department of Corrections to stop Harding before he struck again. The information from the prison indicated that Harding planned to rob more banks and then travel to Winslow to kill the Valley National Bank employees he had robbed or the agents involved in his case. Authorities believed he was heading in that direction. The agent examined the items left in Harding's cell. They were sent to profilers at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia. Behavioral science experts were consulted to determine whether Harding was the type of individual who would carry out his threats. The assessment indicated he was capable of doing so. If Harding was willing to kill FBI agents, no one was safe. The first solid lead in the hunt for Harding came 3 days after his escape. Pinal County Sheriff's deputies responded to a ranch house 15 miles west of the prison. The owner reported that the house had been burglarized. Clothes, a pair of binoculars, and food had been taken. Several loaded guns were also missing. The FBI and local deputies believed it was Harding stocking up for his bid to seek revenge. They were right. A fingerprint recovered at the house confirmed it was him. Now there was greater concern that he was moving in the direction he had threatened, because he was already trying to carry out his plan. The fugitive was now armed. The FBI turned to the media to warn the public and solicit help. At a news conference, agents released Harding's photograph and information about his escape. Anyone who spotted him was asked to call the FBI immediately, though people were instructed not to approach the suspected killer. The media coverage generated many leads. One came from campers who reported that Harding was stealing food, maps, and camping gear near Lake Mormon, roughly 170 miles north of the prison. Even though Harding knew how to hunt and fish, the burglaries were essential to his survival in the woods. Local officers followed his trail. He would break into cabins, steal food, and move on. Search teams began going house to house through the cabins in the area, an effort carried out by local county sheriff's offices. Harding was getting closer to Grand Canyon National Park. The summer tourist season was beginning, which meant thousands of people would be in danger. Authorities had to find him before anyone was hurt. Based on Harding's northward trail, fugitive response teams from the Arizona Department of Corrections and Sheriff's Departments focused their search in Coconino County. It was an enormous undertaking. The county contained vast stretches of woods and difficult terrain, perfect cover for a fugitive. Helicopters, dogs, horses, and large numbers of personnel were mobilized in a massive operation. A National Forest Service officer patrolling a campground in Coconino County spotted Harding walking out of a wooded area. It was too dangerous for a lone officer to follow the armed killer into the forest. When reinforcements arrived, Derek Ray Harding had disappeared once again. The deadly fugitive was still on the loose. Derek Ray Harding had escaped from prison in Florence, Arizona, after serving only 9 months of 4 life sentences. The FBI believed the suspected killer was heading north toward Winslow, Arizona, to seek revenge on the agents who had locked him away. Agents responded to a report of a cabin burglary near the town of Pine, midway between the prison and Winslow. This time, Harding stole a truck and left a note that read, in effect, "Thank you for the items, Derek Ray," apparently trying to make his name known as a folk hero. When the story hit the news, investigators worried the public might not realize how dangerous Harding was. They knew he had likely dismembered a man in California. Now, Harding had a vehicle and was armed. He was nearing Grand Canyon National Park as tens of thousands of tourists were beginning their vacations. For 10 days, no new sightings came in. With the truck, he could have been hundreds of miles away already. Then a Department of Public Safety officer spotted the stolen truck 50 miles north of Pine. Derek Ray Harding was driving. The officer called for backup. Before other officers could respond, Harding jumped from the truck and fled on foot into the familiar cover of the woods. FBI agents responded immediately. In the truck, they found another note signed by Harding. Pine, Arizona, lies in the wooded area of northern Arizona, along the route from Florence. He was almost to Winslow, getting much closer to the area of greatest concern. Agents knew he had weapons and a vehicle. His presence in that region strengthened their belief that he intended to carry out his threats. Authorities in Winslow were not the only ones in danger. The FBI established a field command post inside Grand Canyon National Park, where Harding posed a threat to thousands of tourists. They tracked confirmed sightings and plotted his movements. Agents coordinated the response to each sighting and relayed information among the many law enforcement agencies involved. The territory being searched was vast, and Harding was moving quickly. 2 tourists reported to agents that Harding had carjacked them inside the national park. He commandeered their car at gunpoint and demanded they drive him to the canyon's rim. He checked into a hotel room there and forced his captives inside. His gun prevented them from calling for help. The couple feared he might shoot them at any moment. Harding recorded a message for authorities. He demanded that the search for him be called off for the next 3 days. He also ordered the release of one of his brothers from prison and $1 million in ransom for the release of a family he planned to kidnap in exchange for the childless couple he was holding. The next day, Harding forced the couple to drive him to a store where he purchased camping gear, new clothing, and food. Before he could find a family with children to kidnap, a Forest Service officer recognized him and began following the car. Harding fired a warning shot at the officer, causing him to slow down, then forced the driver to speed up. When he had gained some distance, Harding ordered the car stopped. He jumped out and fled on foot. Since he had shot at a law enforcement officer, it was clear Harding was becoming desperate and more dangerous. Authorities had information that he had vowed not to be taken alive. He was on a vendetta against the FBI and Valley National Bank and had already been involved in a shooting with the Forest Service. Search teams had to move cautiously through the woods. They could not simply run after him at full speed, which gave him additional time to stay ahead. The kidnapped couple provided agents with information about Harding's new clothes and his plan. Once again, armed search parties scoured the area where he was last seen, but found no trace of him. Harding was back on foot and hiding somewhere inside the immense Grand Canyon National Park. He had vowed to kidnap a family with children. To stop him, the FBI brought in its elite hostage rescue team. HRT agents blanketed the area, rappelling into the canyon, checking caves, and conducting aerial searches. They had to find the suspected killer before he had the chance to kill again. Search teams from the FBI, the Arizona Department of Corrections, and local sheriff's departments trailed fugitive Derek Ray Harding through Grand Canyon National Park. They mobilized dozens of officers, tracking dogs, and helicopters in the effort to find him before he kidnapped more hostages. The accused killer could have been anywhere inside the park's 1.2 million acres. Because of the danger Harding presented to tourists, the FBI decided to close Grand Canyon National Park for the busy 4th of July weekend. It was a major undertaking. The holiday weekend is normally the park's busiest time of year. It was also the first time in the park's history that it had been closed because of a criminal threat. Harding was dangerous enough to warrant the extreme measure. He was moving around inside the canyon, and with so many people present, it was impossible to control the situation. Roadblocks were set up to move visitors out safely while search teams looked for him. New visitors were turned away, and those already in the park were asked to leave. Police established roadblocks at entry and exit points around the Grand Canyon. They searched vehicles and informed motorists about Harding, but they did not stop him in time. 2 British tourists were preparing to leave the park when an armed man approached them. They knew it was Derek Ray Harding, though he no longer looked like the photographs in the news. He was much thinner, had blonde hair, and was clean-shaven. Since the park had been locked down, the women were his only way out. At a roadblock, a ranger stopped the car and spoke to the 3 people inside. Harding had threatened to kill the women if they tipped anyone off. The kidnapped women had to remain calm, while Harding sat with a gun trained on them. The officer did not recognize the blonde-haired man and let them through. Once they were out of the park, Harding forced them to drive 60 miles south to Williams, Arizona. When they were far from the police at the Grand Canyon, he ordered them to stop the car. Brandishing his gun, he marched the terrified women into the cover of the woods. The women believed he was taking them there to execute them. To their relief, he left them there and fled in their car. The women managed to free themselves and ran to a store. A clerk called authorities. The women were badly shaken but unharmed. They provided police with updated information about Harding, including his changed appearance and the getaway vehicle. A description of the stolen car was broadcast. A Department of Public Safety officer spotted the vehicle traveling from the Grand Canyon toward Phoenix. Highway Patrolman Marcus Riley was on duty for the Arizona Department of Public Safety. When Harding drove past, Riley began following the armed fugitive. It was not long before the situation became more than a car chase. I heard a great big bang and thought something was wrong with the car. I checked the gauges. Everything looked fine. Then I realized I had been shot at. I notified my dispatcher that I had been shot at, that I was all right, and that I was going to follow him. The gunfire forced the patrolman to keep his distance. He knew he could not afford to lose Harding. The fugitive tried to escape by turning off near the town of Sedona. He took the ramp, slammed on the brakes, skidded, and hit a sign in a slight accident. Riley shouted for him to stop. The shot had missed. The officer had orders not to follow Harding into the woods. When backup arrived, agents and officers began a grid search of the area. Again, Harding could not be found. After nightfall, a lead came into the command post. A resident reported seeing Harding drinking from a garden hose in a neighborhood near Sedona. A Border Patrol agent responded. As far as anyone knew, Harding was still armed. This time there was no shootout. After being relentlessly pursued for 54 days across hundreds of miles, an exhausted Derek Ray Harding simply gave up. There was no doubt in anyone's mind that the efforts of the teams chasing him had run him into the ground. He was lying there, dog-tired, with his tongue hanging out. For a man who still had his weapon on him and had vowed not to be taken alive, all he wanted was a glass of water. Derek Ray Harding received 6 additional years for his actions during the violent flight. Authorities in California decided to extradite him and charge him with the murder of Samuel McCray. His trial began several years later. Prosecuting attorneys proved that Derek Harding broke into Samuel McCray's house to rob him. Harding was angry that McCray had pressed charges after an earlier robbery. He bound McCray, rendering him helpless. Harding used his sawed-off .22 caliber Western field rifle, the same weapon witnesses had seen him use to kill a dog earlier. At point-blank range, Harding fired one shot into Samuel McCray. Minute blood spatter and human tissue found in the drain indicated that Harding had likely dismembered the victim in the bathtub. He then dumped the body parts into the Burns Cut River. About 4 years after Samuel McCray's death, a California jury found Derek Ray Harding guilty of murder. He was sentenced to death. Derek Ray Harding was sent to San Quentin Prison, where he remains locked down in maximum security on death row.